One thing I will mention before we jump in is these pictures you're seeing in the background here are being displayed in a public kind of way for the first time. These pictures were put into this book. They were taken for this book for the Women's Club of Newburgh. This book has all of these pictures, and it also has a few other pictures that are of buildings that are no longer here. Unfortunately, one or two of these you're seeing right now are no longer here. It's sad. It's reality. But in this book you'll see pictures of those earlier buildings that were not here. And they're black and whites. This is like the fourth update of the Women's Club of Newburgh book, the Markers book. Yeah. And this is the first one that has colored pictures. So it's a little more modern and has some updated material on history as well. So anyway, if you're interested, these are available. $25 if you want to take one home today. So that's that. Now let me get on to other business here. First of all, welcome to our speaker series. It's great to have you here. We do this on the first Sunday of each month, and we've covered just a wide range of different topics. Several have been on Lincoln. One was on our rocks display, and Ralph Baker was our speaker of that one, and we have that on video. We do have all of our speaker series presentations on video, and someday they will be up on our website and probably our Facebook page, and I look forward to that day arriving. That's in progress right now. And so you'll be able to go back and see something spoken to, say, 2 years ago, which was pretty cool. So, my name is Randy Wheeler. I'm on the exhibit committee, and I'm also a docent with the museum, and enjoy doing that kind of thing. And we're working on putting together our next exhibit, which is going to be kind of a next step that you see on the exhibit that is in here right now. This is the second iteration of the relationship between Newburgh and the Great Ohio River, and how we have interacted with the river over time. Today we're going to have a very special presentation. I should mention right here at the outset that please put your phones on silence if you would, because we're going to have a very special guest. We don't want her to get upstaged by a modern contrivance such as a cell phone. Okay. All right. Oh, by the way, restrooms, there's one down the hall that way, and one down the hall that way. You take a left, and this one you just go straight back if you would need a restroom. All right. Let's go back to the beginning here. I don't have all this memorized, and so I decided I would just put it in here. Okay. Eldora Miner Raleigh was born in Newburgh, Indiana in 1852. She was the daughter of Luther Marshall Miner and Mary S. McCullough. Mrs. Raleigh's ancestors were in Indiana before 1812. Her father, Luther Marshall Miner, was born in Rockport, and her mother, Mary McCullough, was born in Boonville. Her father's family came from Vermont to Spencer County, and her mother's family migrated from Canada to our county. Mary McCullough's father, James McCullough, was one of the earliest settlers in Boonville, and he was a veteran of the War of 1812. Luther Marshall Miner and Mary McCullough were married and settled in Newburgh in 1840 and built the Miner Raleigh house, which stands at 200 East Jennings Street. Mr. Miner embarked into the mercantile business with Samuel Weed. They dealt in groceries and hardware, buying all kinds of produce, which they shipped to Cincinnati, Ohio, and all the way down to New Orleans. Mr. Miner was also active in Newburgh's political life, serving as a town trustee at one time. 3 children were born of the Miners: Aurelia, Medora, and Eldora. She's the topic of our get-together today. Eldora was educated in St. Mary's in the Woods in Terre Haute, Indiana, and was a lifelong member of the Alumni Association. She married Maurice Raleigh in from Evansville. Maurice was in the furniture business and traveled extensively. It's believed that Maurice and Eldora were divorced, which was very unusual at that time. That's not been proven, but that is a very strong theory. Which brings us to Anne Rust Aurand. Anne Rust Aurand is a Newburgh native. She retired as a middle school teacher and librarian, and is a current businesswoman. She has 321 Vintage, which you've probably been to, or if you haven't, you really ought to go. It is a very cool shop. She was instrumental in establishing Newburgh, England as a sister city, and over there across the pond, they call it Newburgh, England, same spelling. And was instrumental in establishing that relationship. And if you look at the town hall, there's a old English red telephone booth outside. And Anne's responsible for that being there. The kind of telly outfits that they had over in England. Anne has served 21 years plus on the Newburgh Town Council. In her spare time, if there is such a thing, she works at restoring an 1870 home in Boonville. A very cool place. We're very happy to have Anne today, and she is going to be here speaking as Eldora Miner Raleigh. Eldora, take it away. I'm going to put up a different slide here. If I can get this guy to work. There we go. Okay.
Newburgh, Indiana, May 19th, 1929. Dear Sister Magdalena, your postal card received in March asking me to tell something of myself. I haven't answered. I know you must consider me to be extremely rude and have lost my former St. Mary's Academic Institute courtesy, but the fact is that I have such a multiplicity of civic and religious interests that I could not give your card the attention that it deserved. I've been such a wallflower in the St. Mary of the Woods, as my college is now known, Alumni Association, although I'm a charter member and I was present at the beginning and I've attended all the meetings, and any mention of my activities I'm sure would be of no interest to your members today. But let me assure you, sister, that I have not lost those manners that I learned so long ago. 60 years since my graduation from St. Mary of the Woods, with honors. For your information, I will say that I've had a very active life. In November of 1881, I married Mr. Maurice Francis Raleigh. He was from a prominent Evansville family and in the furniture business and also in politics. But he traveled extensively and I was alone a great deal of the time. Thankfully, my mother still lived at our family home in Newburgh, a house my father had built in 1840. Today, I live there alone. In a large brick house on a hill overlooking the Ohio River. It's surrounded by a tall limestone wall and a large yard full of trees and flowers. And sister, I think you'll find this of great interest. One of our most beautiful trees is a rare flowering native of Japan. Our start was taken from a root from a tree at Thornton Place, a Paulownia grandiflora. Thornton Place is a retirement home for Presbyterian ministers, their wives, and missionaries just east of our town. Paulownia grandiflora is beautiful right now and as fragrant as can be, and lavender flowers are coming down in showers. The tree's name comes from the Russian Grand Duchess, Paulownia. The original tree was brought from France by the Reverend Dwyer, the first resident Catholic priest in Evansville many years ago. Mr. Raleigh and I lived together for only a few years, having no children of my own. I can't send you a picture of my grandchildren, but I did have children. I taught in the Evansville Public Schools at Baker, Wheeler, Stanley Hall for 35 years. And each day I would catch the traction just below my home on Jennings Street and ride an hour into Evansville, doing the reverse each evening. Upon retirement, I received a lovely gift, a very special fountain pen, which helps me correspond with hundreds of my former students. During that time when I was teaching, I also owned an art studio at my address with Mr. Raleigh, 605 Upper 6th Street, My art students were instructed in flower sketching, landscapes, portraits using crayon, pastels, and watercolors. I did portrait plaques and other graphs, color graphs, and photographs in oil and watercolors. My studio could enlarge pictures of any size or kind to life size. My work has been displayed in Guggenheim and Company's windows and Smith's Art Store on Main Street in Evansville. I am credited with inventing alabaster oil painting. And about that same time, from 1883 to 1888, I wrote a column for several area newspapers about activities and life in my small town. And one of my favorites was a column for the Evansville Journal called Newburgh Nuggets, with each article signed by Gertrude to protect my identity. In my retirement, and as my dear mother has passed away, I am alone in the world. And I have tried to be of use to my hometown. Some see me as the town's historian, as I chronicled events in Newburgh in a book called The Early Days of Newburgh on the Ohio. I should add that I wrote a second book about Newburgh and Warrick County. Yes. I've served as the president of the Warrick County Historical Society and a member of the Southwest Indiana Historical Society. And sister, I am a staunch believer in women's rights and organized and served as the Warrick County League of Women Voters president for 8 years and president of the Civic Improvement Committee, working to improve living conditions for our widows and orphans. I remember our little town during the Civil War, the war between the states. And although my father passed away when I was 8 and before the war had started, I have worked tirelessly through this committee to improve the lives of our local veterans and their pensioners. I wrote to President Theodore Roosevelt about a horrid condition in which a 98-year-old woman, Mary Clark, a pensioner of the War of 1812, was being kept by her grandson and his wife. Horrid conditions. At present, I am the town treasurer and the first woman to serve on the Newburgh Town Board. I was elected just 2 years ago in 1927, and less than 8 years after women received the right to vote. For 8 years, I have been secretary of the Newburgh Public Library Board and chairman of the Book Selection Committee. And you will be happy to know, sister, that if I find a book that I find objectionable, somehow just not proper for our fair little town, I simply wrap it in newspaper and have it removed. I was admitted to the Warrick County Bar in 1921, and at the same time I became a notary public, and I have been complimented by men who did business with me as one woman who did not tell everything she knew. I have been organist at St. John's Catholic Church for, I don't even remember how many years. We have a brand new 2-manual Esty, and Father Winterhalter says the music is fine. I belong to the Parent Teachers Club and was secretary there for 3 years. I'm a member of the Daughters of Isabella in Evansville, but I am not active. And now I furnish a column to our Newburgh Weekly Register for each issue, and any historical papers appear in the state bulletins are usually about this part of the country, written by me. I am eligible for membership in the Daughters of the American Revolution and the War of 1812, but I haven't joined them. Of course, being a member of so many organizations necessitates the attendance at many conventions and much clerical work, and my neighbors speak to me as the busiest woman in town. In 1900, I helped organize a county humane society and was vice president of their board for many years. I am just too busy to visit or gossip, and I do not belong to any card clubs. I have no time or use for dilly-dallying. Well, sister, I must go. I hope this explains why I have taken so long to respond. I do enjoy hearing from you, and I miss all of my teachers and friends from college. But I have a pie in the oven right now, and I must go. I'll set it on the kitchen window to cool a bit. No worries for me for that it'll be stolen by the hobos or tramps passing through our town these days. They don't like my cooking. Yours with love and admiration, Eldora.
We're going to entertain questions for Eldora.
Well, Eldora has a few other things to say to you
Oh,
first.
okay.
Thank you.
Too soon.
Well, in going through the very hefty pack of information right here that the museum has on Eldora was a 2-page unfinished letter to Sister Magdalena. And so I took the 2 pages where she outlines pretty much everything that she had done, just as this letter does. And I went through newspaper articles and other people's speaking things that have been done about her, and put together what I think her letter would have said if it had been finished. And so that's what I just read to you. I don't know exactly, unless it was never finished and never sent, but I don't know exactly how this came to the possession of the museum. I don't know who donated it or why it's even here, if she actually sent it, so she probably never did. It's written a year and a day before she died, which I think is kind of interesting. May the 19th, 1929 is the date of this. And actually this postcard is a picture of Terre Haute, St. Mary of the Woods is in West Terre Haute, and it's addressed to a woman whose name is Gertrude. And Gertrude was the name that she used when she wrote the columns, or beginning columns, in 1883 to 1888 for the Evansville Journal. So let's take a look at what she said and how we would interpret it today. First of all, St. Mary of the Woods was founded just about 20 years before she went there, so it was a relatively new school. It wasn't a college then, but it was a new school. And she graduated in 1869 when she was 18. So probably came right back home and started teaching. She got married when she was 30. That was unheard of. You know, she was long considered, from that 18-year-old coming back to teach, she was long considered an old maid before she actually got married. She married Maurice Raleigh, who brought a furniture business to Newburgh. There actually was a furniture shop, building, construction, manufacturing place in Newburgh. And throughout her columns, she wrote a lot about people getting new furniture. And then, sometimes, the next week, their daughter would get married in the parlor. So it was interesting to read her articles. And I'm going to share some of those with you today because although she said she didn't have time to gossip, I don't know where else she got her information. Lots of new Davenports, lots of new settees delivered in Newburgh from Paragon Furniture. Thornton Place, today we know it as Thornton Home, or we know it as the Overlook Drive, where new construction is going on right now. A very modern new house is being built right at the corner of Thornton Place and the old highway. The Palomia Grandiflora. My mother used to talk about that all the time because we only lived straight through, just a block from Eldora's house, on the hill beside our house. Still today, there is a Palomia Grandiflora there. With a good strong wind or most anything else, it's going to fall off the side of the hill because it's leaning out now precariously. Another place you can see them is at the Overlook Park, Indian Hill Overlook Park, up at the top, and you see them up there also. These are, I mean, it's fascinating how they came here, how they got here, you know, and then they spread from her house to our across the street neighbors to all over the place, but there are only a few left. So in the spring, when you see big clusters of lavender and smell, this great smell, that's Palomia grandiflora that you're smelling. She says her artwork was at Smith's Art Store, and I wonder if, on Main Street, I wonder if, in Evansville, I wonder if that was later Smith and Butterfield. Probably.
Yeah.
She wrote also using other names like Laura, but hardly ever did she write using her own name, trying to protect herself. And sometimes her readers came back at her, and sometimes her editor would print the things that her readers had sent in and they weren't happy about. She wrote about something, there was a brawl after a baseball game between Newburgh, the Newburgh Fuquays team, and the Boonville team in Boonville. There was a brawl. And she wrote about that. Very critical of what happened. And people in Boonville struck back. People in Newburgh struck back. And her editor printed it. Another interesting thing about baseball, she wrote a lot about baseball in the summertime, obviously, because there were so many different teams in Newburgh. Fuquay's Dry Goods, which would be the Exchange Hotel, Chivian's department store, most recently an antique store, and it's been empty for about 6 years now. They went to play Tell City. A lot of back and forth between Newburgh and Tell City, Newburgh and Cannleton. River boats going, excursion boats going to Tell City and Cannleton for Sunday afternoon dances and dinners and things like that all the time. 400 and 500 people coming on an excursion boat from Evansville, dancing and a band, live band and food on the boat and going to Tell City. Anyway, they went to Tell City and Newburgh won. And as a gift to the winning team, the chair company there, and it wasn't called Tell City Chair at that time, but the chair company there gave the winning team a bat made out of 3 or 4 different kinds of wood. And what happened to those? You know, did those actually come from the company that spawned the Tell City Chair Factory? There was one in Newburgh at one time, but who knows today what happened to it. But you just, you know, as you read her columns, you pick up so many things. And the columns, because they're written in 1883 to begin with, are before my grandparents' time. So they're not, there's not a lot of there are not a lot of names that I recognize. Although I did find someone that had my grandmother's name, her exact name, but it was her name before she wasn't born yet. It was somebody else who had her name. The Highholders, my grandparents were the Highholders, and they were very prominent in business in town. But I don't know who this person was. It must be somebody my grandmother was named for. One of her most prized contributions was a sketch, because I don't think she was just an art teacher, but she was quite talented artistically. A sketch of the distinguished John R. Brackenridge, a judge who married into her mother's family. He married her mother's sister, and they lived in Boonville at a house just a square from the courthouse, just a block from the courthouse. And that's where Abraham Lincoln had access to valuable and fine library books during his formative period. And they say it didn't happen. That came from her obituary, a column about her death. It wasn't actually her obituary, it was a column about her death. And you have something to read to us from that?
Okay. Very interesting column that was titled Newburgh Mourns. Fortunate indeed are those who have been privileged to know and be associated with Mrs. Eldora Miner Raleigh, who passed away last Sunday morning at the home where she had lived for more than a half-century. Born here when Newburgh was in its heyday of its youth, she witnessed its transaction from the bustling little river city that it became to a quiet suburban village afterwards. Being a gifted writer as well as a keen observer, she watched the passing of the years as an interested spectator, also as a chronicle of events, coming in her later life to be looked upon as town historian, the faithful recorder of our past and its people. A woman of rare intelligence, liberally educated, possessed of unbounded ambition and zeal for the improvement of not only herself, but her associates and the community in general, she won the admiration and high esteem of all those who came in contact with her. And to the many whom she taught and encouraged to higher hopes and nobler aims, her character was always an inspiration. We mourn your passing, Mrs. Raleigh. We feel that your place in Newburgh can never quite be filled. Yet with you has gone a strong store of information, tradition, and happy tales of bygone days that will not be replaced. But we thank you for the splendid heritage that is ours in the memory of the life that you lived among us. Sadly, she died of ptomaine poisoning.
Wow.
Yes.
3 long weeks of suffering.
Yeah. She was buried beside her parents and sisters at Myrtle Ridge, once known as Sargent Cemetery. May she rest in peace.
That's right up here at the end of Sharon Road, on the old ridge.
Yeah.
She also referred to it as the old graveyard, and then the Sergeant Mine and the Sergeant House was right across the street where the American Legion is. That was the office of the Sergeant Mine. Some of you may remember when they remodeled the American Legion and they took out the cornerstone from the building because it was the Sergeant Mine cornerstone, and it was a Geraldo moment because sergeant relatives came from Tennessee and from Indianapolis, and we were all in the parking lot. I mean, half the town was in the parking lot waiting until they cracked open that cornerstone to see what was in there, and it was mostly dust and not even any lumps of 100-year coal. But
Yeah.
And is her tombstone still up?
yes, it is. There, it's weird because there's a center stone, and I know that's not weird, but then they're around it, kind of like moonbeams, and they face each other.
Oh.
The stones face, some of them face in, some of them face out, but yeah, they are there. They are there. Yeah, and you can still see the stones because most of the people are buried there. You can't see the stones. So here's an interesting little tidbit for those of you who might have gone out and bought a $50 t-shirt somewhere. This is from one of her books, May the 27th, 1927. During the presidency of Andrew Jackson, Congress passed a pension law which was to affect all who had served in either the Army, Navy, or militia during the Revolutionary War. Applicants were required to make proof before the court. Accordingly, during the first term of court under Judge Hall, the following named persons in Warrick made proof under such service. And then she has a list of names. She wrote a fantastic letter to the President of the United States, asking him personally to look into the situation of a woman in Newburgh who was being treated horribly and abused, and when her neighbors came and tried to help her, then her grandson and his wife just beat her even more and left her worse. They stole her checks, they put her mark of X on it and cashed it, and she had nothing. It was horrible. She was locked up in their house, and she described all this to the President of the United States. And how that got back here, I have no idea. It's stamped that it was received by the Military Bureau, but then it came back. So did they send it back to her? I don't know. The war with Mexico having come to a close in 1848, the inhabitants of Warrick entering upon a long era of peace and prosperity. Business flourished on farms and in towns. Newburgh was the gateway for the entrance of manufactured goods from Louisville and Cincinnati, and the outlet for produce of those destinations, which was New Orleans or other southern cities. A never-ending procession of wagons bearing the country products could be seen on the roads leading to the Burg. The Burg. Nothing new under the sun. As the town was called by the teamsters who drove the wagons from Warrick, DuBois, and Pike counties. The Burg. $50 for the t-shirt. The Burg. It was not uncommon in those days, in the latter 50s, 1850s, to see 20 steamboats. We've heard this, but this is first person. 20 steamboats with their bows shoved into the bank, taking on immense cargoes of grain, tobacco, pork, baled hay, and livestock. And she doesn't mention it here, but in her Newburgh Nuggets, there must have been 1 million potatoes that left this town every summer. Because potatoes, almost every summer column has a little sentence or two that says, so-and-so is buying potatoes for such and such a pound. Have them on Water Street. They'll pay for them in Water Street. All of these things came from with a radius of 50 miles. Many business houses were erected on Water Street and State Street. The solid block of 8 stores which stood opposite the present ESNN traction station was composed of 2-story brick buildings with immense basements for the storage of farm products whose owners were waiting for their favorite steamboats.
Across
On both sides.
It's about
2
where
blocks.
the landing is now, isn't
It is. Yes.
Wow.
To the west, yes. Yes. 2 wharf boats received freight from Pittsburgh, Louisville, Cincinnati, and other cities. And then, as children like to say, somebody had to go and spoil it all. Fort Sumter fell, and with it, our commercial prosperity. It was a trying time for the border counties, having such intimate business relations with southern states. Indiana had, Warrick County had 2 regiments that were called up in August of 1861. The Indiana 25th, with companies H and I, were organized out of Warrick County. There were 16 members of these companies who died at the Battle of Fort Donelson in Tennessee on the Cumberland River in February the 11th of 1862 to February the 16th. After the battle, the victory, the regiment was encamped a mile and a half away at Shiloh, a church, which in Hebrew, the word Shiloh means place of peace, where on April the 6th and 7th, 1862, a 2-day battle cost each side more than 10,000 men. Some of the wounded were transported to Newburgh to be treated in the former Exchange Hotel, Chivian's, the country gentleman, antiques. Dorcas Fellows, who lies in Myrtle Ridge, the old cemetery, was a victim. In 1864, the Indiana 25th marched with General Sherman to the sea. Members of the 25th were mustered out on July the 17th, 1864. They had traveled 3,200 miles on foot, 1,350 miles by rail, and 2,430 on transport. In our midst, we still have a few veterans of the Civil War on our streets. We see Mr. William Warren, who lost his right arm at the Battle of Champion Hills in Vicksburg, May 16, 1863. Our dry goods owner, Mr. Fred Frank. If you've been to Ghost Walk, you know about Fred Frank. Mr. Fred Frank, Mr. John Lawhead, Mr. Hiram R. Robertson, Mr. George Veneta. They are all still left with us. When we meet them on the street, we speak, or if we can't speak, we just bow our heads. While honoring the dead, we must not forget the living. We are apt to think of our home folks as being very commonplace people, and what they do and what they have done is nothing compared to what people in a more distant locality have done. We couldn't be further wrong. Now for the fun stuff. And we are tired, just let me know, because I have spent 4 months on this, and seriously, and I have spent days at a time on this, and it is so, so interesting. But I pulled some things from her columns, and these came from the Newburgh Library. I have 45 pages of
Wow.
7 columns wide of her writing, her gossip about Newburgh, and her human interest stories about Newburgh. And
What
I
was
just
your
wanna
favorite?
Pardon?
What's your favorite?
What's
What's your favorite column? Did you find one that you just would share with us? One of your very favorite columns you
I
wrote?
want to read it to you.
Oh, okay. Duh.
That's what these are. And there are so many. There are, you know, I started marking them with a Sharpie. I just went wild. They're all priceless, totally. But I picked some things for this period of time, starting in July of 1887. She writes about birthday parties. She writes about, you know, they used to celebrate 10th anniversaries, 10th wedding anniversaries, really big. You'd go home and 100 of people would be in your house and they'd all be partying because it was your 10th anniversary, and they'd bring you tin, some kind of tin gift, because that was good luck for your 10th anniversary. There were birthday parties, there were dances. We had all kinds of dance halls in town. We had dance clubs that young people organized. We don't have anything to do. Okay, well, why don't you organize a dance club? They did it 150 years ago. Okay, so this is July 1887. A little bit of something about the ball game. The final game of baseball played here this summer was between the City Brights of Tell City and the Fuquays of Newburgh. So they would have been sponsored by the dry goods store. 11 innings were necessary to decide the game, which finally resulted in favor of the home club. John Miller of the Fuquays made a brilliant run and was presented a handsome bat by the Tell City Club. It was made in Tell City and was of maple, ash, and walnut. The score was 13 to 15. She always gives a score with the losing score first. An elegant set of furniture from Evansville was brought to town last week by John Schiesel and Martin Withers. It was the property of Mr. Conrad Rumpf, and now cards are being received from Mr. and Mrs. F.C. Breezes, inviting us to attend the marriage of their daughter, Miss Katie, to the same Conrad Rumpf at 8 o'clock Wednesday evening, August the 3rd, at their new home at Point Pleasant. And boy, do I wish I knew where that was. I haven't run across that anyplace, but I would like to know where that house was. Here's the really interesting thing. The Gypsies came to town. The Feast of the Gypsies. This is still July 1887. The Queen of the Gypsies sent forth her deputies to select for her and her royal subjects a place under the influence of the good spirit which would combine beauty of scenery, cool breezes, and ample room for the royal feet. Do you have a picture, Randy? Where are you? Oh, do you have the
Yeah.
picture of that shows the Methodist church next to the house?
Yeah. It may take a moment to find it, but it is in here.